Happy holidays and New Year's to all. This is PBN, your Polandball News Network. It's been a busy week in the world this holiday season, so I hope you've all stuffed yourselves on the appropriate amounts of turkey and booze. With the year of 2023 finally drawing to a close, the newsreels have gifted us with some great chaos to discuss, as we prepare for what I believe is going to be a very chaotic 2024. Anyway, let's stop wasting time and get to discussing this week's big events. Let's start with what's going on in Asia and our friends to the east, more specifically, North Korea. Feeling outshined by the events happening in Gaza and Ukraine, the fat little goblin in North Korea was missing the spotlight and decided to drag it back in his own direction to the chagrin of everybody around. In order to reclaim that limelight that they hold so dearly, the North Korean government has ordered an acceleration of war preparations in the country so they can finally bring the fight to the anti-imperialists. Really? That's lame. I guess that means the South Koreans are really going to have to start cooking. And when I say cooking, I don't mean planning. I mean the actual cooking of food. No doubt it has been quite some time since the South Koreans have given the North some food aid, so I imagine they're probably feeling a bit peckish and hangry by now. Normally, a couple 100 tons of rice and wheat quiets them down for a few months. All's well that ends well. Thankfully, due to our vast experience with the caterwauling of the regime in North Korea, we're pretty good at calling their bluff. After all, did they not just give Russia more than 1 million artillery rounds for their invasion of Ukraine? To me, it seems foolish to start war preparations after emptying your antiquated stockpiles. Then again, I did hear that the North Koreans were raising their military budget. However, I don't think the extra $5 will help them very much. Now, on the topic of our friends in Russia, it's been a very busy week for them in Europe. Let's begin on the diplomatic front of Russian affairs. In an action that many considered to be completely out of the ordinary for the Russian Federation, they have threatened somebody with violence. This time, it's Finland. Angered that the once neutral Finns have joined NATO, the Russians made them a heartfelt promise that if ever a NATO versus Russia war breaks out, that they will be the very first to suffer. How very touching and thoughtful. Surely this death threat will make the Finns rethink and reconsider abandoning their neutrality. Thankfully, I'm going to go out on a limb and bravely assume that the Finns aren't too worried about Russian aggression. After all, it isn't like it would be the first time that Russia has attacked Finland. If I recall correctly, the Winter War in 1940 did not go so hot for the Russian invaders, as they took huge losses to a much smaller and more resilient Finnish force. It almost seems like there's a theme with Russian invaders taking huge losses to a small defending army. However, fortunately for the Russians, they managed to run off with Viipuri by the war's end, a Finnish city that is currently called Vyborg. So if anything, they can still declare the Winter War to be a Pyrrhic victory for the Soviet Union. You captured some marshes and forests. Well done. Now let's move over to the Ukrainian side of things in context of Russia's week. Well, what can I say? Those tricksters in Ukraine have done it again. With the help of cruise missiles, the Ukrainian Air Force has taken out yet another Russian warship. This time it was the ship the Novosibirsk, which was at a port in Feodosia, a city in Russian-occupied Ukraine. With the sinking of the Novosibirsk, the Russian Navy has now lost 15 ships to the Ukrainians in this war. Not too shabby for a country with no navy to speak of, eh? The loss of the Novosibirsk did not go down easy for the Russian leadership. In fact, it went down bitterly. It was time for vengeance, but not on the Ukrainians. Instead, Russia's evil eye has turned inwards on the commanders of the Crimean Air Defense Forces. Those in charge are not being jailed, however. Instead, they are being sent to assault groups to charge at the Ukrainian front lines, a role usually reserved for those taken from prisons. So I guess jail doesn't matter either way. They often speak of reliving the glory days in Russia, so it warms my heart to see them engaged in a time-honored Soviet tradition of purging the people that messed up or pissed you off. Surely this will work out well for them, just as the purges of the past ended up providing excellent results, both in government and on the battlefield. Enough about Russia. Let's move on to the Western Hemisphere, shall we? Lately it seems Venezuela has gotten jealous of Israel and Russia and wants to get in on a taste of the action. It seems that wars are in vogue right now. Their president has claimed that he's begun to mobilize their troops to annex the oil-rich Essequibo region of Guyana, their peaceful neighbor to the east. I'm not sure if he knows that between him and them is a dense, impassable jungle, but I don't want to be the one to tell him. Never interrupt the enemy when they're making a mistake, as they say. While they may be incompetent, that isn't to say that the Venezuelans aren't giving it the old college try. Upon hearing the news that the United Kingdom has deployed a warship to Guyanese waters, Venezuela has decided to host war games as a means to taunt and intimidate the British. A South American dictator poking around at the British fleet to look tough? I almost feel like I've seen this one before. Maybe we should ask Argentina if they can remember. As of now, it's hard to say if it's all bluster or if Venezuela is the real deal. Either way, I reckon it will end the same for them whether or not they invade. And that's in total and utter embarrassment. Fitting for a dictator. Anyways, that's all of the news that I'm willing to cover for this week. Thank you for tuning in to PBN, your Polandball News Network. We will see you again soon, unless there's world peace, in which case you won't. Goodbye, and Happy New Year.